Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you another really fascinating guest today who is involved in creating a better tomorrow on many unique fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Angel Eduardo, who is a writer, a musician, a photographer, a designer. He's located in New York City, where he currently serves as the director of messaging and editorial for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. He's also an advisory board member and also a Fair in the Arts Fellow. And at the organization, he helps to shape their pro-human approach to the very contentious and divided discourse that's going on out there nowadays on many fronts. He's also a contributor to the Center for Inquiry's blog. He writes on various topics, including science, communication, skepticism, and morality for a column entitled Searching for Better Angels. He's also very well known for coining and promoting the rhetorical concept of StarManning, which is something we'll get into. Angel holds a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing from CUNY Hunter College. He's had writing featured all over the place in Newsweek, Areo Magazine, Mr. Bella's Neighborhood, The Caribbean Writer, among other print and online publications. As his photographs have been featured in various exhibitions and used as cover art for books, most notably Personal Effects, Essays on Memoir, Teaching and Culture, in the work of Louise DeSalvo for Fordham University Press, which makes use of his photography, Early Bird. Angel has been writing, performing, and recording music since the age of 15. He's been intimately involved in every aspect of projects, from songwriting, producing, mixing, mastering, to designing and overseeing creation of various album artwork, concert posters, and merchandise. And in the social realm, Angel is actively involved in advocating for compassionate, honest, civil approaches to discourse, even in the unique world we find ourselves in today. A lot of very exciting things we have to talk about. Angel Eduardo, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today.
Well, thank you, Ira, and thank you for going through that long bio.
No, it's a fascinating bio. I could have read further, but I thought, we want to hear it from you instead. Yeah, right. Angel, take a little time, if you would. Talk a little about yourself. Everything from where you grew up, what got you interested in the arts and music and writing, and a little bit of that early journey. It's a really fascinating story, and I'd love to hear it from you.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me on. First of all, it's great to be here. And let's see, I was born in New York City, and I lived in and around New York my whole life, mainly in a suburb of New York, barely a suburb called Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is just over the George Washington Bridge, which most people probably know about these days because of Bridgegate, I guess it's called, where Chris Christie did some objectionable things with the traffic there. But it's minutes away from New York City. You can literally walk into Manhattan, into the Washington Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, which is where I was before, which is a very Dominican immigrant populated area. And, I've always been a creative kid. I've always been a creative person. I've always had a desire to absorb the world around me, process it, and then spit it back out in some form. And I got some great advice when I was young. I was about 12, maybe 13 years old. A friend of mine's father said, anything you have even the slightest inkling of interest in, you should just pursue it. Just go for it, give it a try. And so that's when I I decided, okay, well, I'm not just going to play music. I'm not just going to write. I'm going to try photography, and I'm going to check out TV production. I'm going to check out, graphic design. And so that's why I started doing all these different things. And it served me really well because um, even though I don't consider any of those mediums to be different in terms of how I approach them, to me, they're all storytelling. But it's great to have these different avenues from which to tell stories, or with which to tell stories, right? Sometimes it's better as a photograph. Sometimes it's better as a poem. Sometimes it's better as an essay or a short story. And sometimes it's better as a song. So I'm just glad that I have a few different areas I can play in and find the best place for my ideas. And it's really all propelled by a compulsion. I need to communicate my thoughts. I need to communicate my ideas to the world. And I want those communications to be useful and helpful and inspiring for people. The music and the books and the movies and all the things that I consumed growing up and still today that have inspired and impacted me so much. They've really changed the course of my life in so many different places and ways. And I just want to pay that sort of thing forward. I just want to create something that has that effect on someone else. And then I'll feel like I have done my job. So
Excellent.
That leads me to where I am here today.
Excellent. And as I mentioned in your bio, Angel, one of those fascinating ideas is something that you coined and have been promoting, this rhetorical concept of StarManning. Basically, we're all somewhat familiar with the concept of the straw man nowadays. This flaw in arguing and argumentation, where here I am, I want more police. All of a sudden, I'm called a fascist. I want more public health services. I'm a socialist. All of a sudden, we're normally told to steel man these things, respond with a strong version of the opposition's argument. But you've created something a little different here in terms of StarManning and taking this a little further to a more efficient form of argumentation. Talk a little bit about how you came up with StarManning and what it's all about, if you would.
It's really just a fancy way of dressing up, not being a judgmental, arrogant jerk, pretty much. And I try very hard to be that way, especially in recent years, especially online when I'm engaging with total strangers. But it's a sort of thing that people skip over, and I think it's a weakness in steel manning, not by design. It's an unintentional thing, because I think that the humanity and the general, good intentions of your opponent were kind of assumed. And so it's like, well, assuming you're speaking to a human being and not a monster, this is what you want to do with their argument. And so what I've noticed is that, people can't steel man each other, or they're unwilling to steel man each other, because they're not just straw manning one another's arguments, they're straw manning each other. So they're not just dealing with a caricature of the argument, they're dealing with a caricature of the person making it. And StarManning is meant to correct for that. So StarManning is meant to, it includes the steel man, but you want to go further, and you want to actually kind of start the steel man by trying to understand why, not just what the other person is arguing, not just the best possible interpretation of what they're arguing, but why they're arguing it in the first place, right? Why does this matter? Why is this so important to them? And the answer is not because they're stupid or evil or any of those quick, easy sort of, I would say, lazy answers, right? Those aren't the real answers. Why do they think this is important? What fundamental values are they connecting to and responding to that are propelling them to have this perspective in the first place? And that's a way of connecting with them as a human being to begin with, and understanding where they're coming from. So using a compassionate approach to understanding them, and then by dint of that, understanding their argument more profoundly. And it doesn't mean accepting their argument, it doesn't mean agreeing with it. It could very much mean disagreeing with it strongly. But you're doing it on firmer ground, and you're doing it in a way that doesn't necessarily move to the point of I can't just defeat your argument. I have to defeat you. I have to destroy you because you are a monster. You are this monstrous vector for this monstrous argument, right? We can separate those two things. We can say, look, I get where you're coming from. I understand the math that got you here. I disagree with your conclusion. I disagree with your answer. Here's why I disagree with your answer. But I don't disagree with your humanity. I don't disagree with your fundamental human impetus for caring about this in the first place, and then just arriving at a different perspective than I do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense.
I try to explain it a little differently every time so it doesn't get tiring. But,
no, it's perfect. And then just, continuing with that, and I just have to ask, because I enjoy the Newsweek article from August 2021. And once again, here, personal case to you, and it's sort of the epitome of this, but the title is "Stop Calling Me White for Having the Wrong Opinions." And, you talk about, I like Led Zeppelin. That it's okay. No, I don't like certain other music, but okay, I like Led Zeppelin. Stop calling me white because of it. Talk a little bit, because I know this was a very unique time. It came after sort of the Breakfast Club interview with President Biden. So the old the famous "You Ain't Black" thing. Just talk a little bit about what was going on then when you wrote that article. And we'll get into fair in a minute, but I sort of want to segue in based on this article.
Yeah. Well, it's something that had been happening to me since I was a kid. In my upbringing, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, being white, quote unquote white, was synonymous with being lame, or uncool, right? And it was just something thrown around, not even necessarily with a racial component to it. I don't think people even thought of it that way necessarily, but they just thought to themselves, oh, that's what lame people do, and, so being a bookish person, that got me labeled white. Listening to the wrong music, that got me labeled white. Wearing the wrong sort of clothes, that got me labeled white. And it wasn't really a racial thing, so I didn't internalize it in that way. But it was this kind of in-group, out-group thing. It was you're not like us because you're behaving this way, or you like these things, and you're supposed to like this other stuff. You're supposed to be this other way. But in recent years, it actually does have a racial component to it, and it's been exacerbated, right? So now having the wrong political opinions gets you labeled white, or white supremacist, or Uncle Tom, or whatever. I've been called all of these things, and I forget exactly what it was, but something triggered it again. I saw something going back and forth on Twitter, and I wrote it in just this furious 2 hours in the middle of the night, and submitted it really quickly. And yeah, it just annoys the hell out of me, because it's this kind of in-group gatekeeping where and this happens across the board. It's with any group basically, but the racial stuff is particularly pernicious because there's something so fundamental to people's identities that is being questioned and stricken from them without their consent. Even though I disagree with race as a construct completely, I think we should abandon it. But even apart from that, this impetus to say, no, you must behave and think and be and feel this way, or else you are not what you say you are. And I find that incredibly pernicious and disgusting, honestly. And so, yeah, I wrote this angry kind of essay just saying, not only do I reject that, but I reject race entirely. And you don't get to tell me who I am, and you don't get to tell me how I feel. And one of the things that prompted it was a few years ago, filling out a form for a workshop that I needed to take for work. And they ask your race, but they left it as like a kind of open field where you can just write in whatever answer you want instead of the multiple choice. And so I wrote human. And that answer was coded by people and remarked on by people as, oh, now we know what race this guy is, because only white people write that. And of course they're wrong, right? But they would never know. It didn't even occur to them that they might be mistaken about that, because they're so convinced in these kind of essentialist ideas. and so yeah, the article is about a lot of that perniciousness that's pervading our discourse and culture right now.
Got it. Got it. I appreciate you sharing that.
Sure.
So, Angel, now heading into FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, just reading from your website, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing civil rights and liberties for all Americans and promoting a common culture based on fairness, understanding, and humanity. And then so to advocate for individuals who are threatened and persecuted for speech, and who are held to a different set of rules based on skin color, ancestry, or other immutable characteristics.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit, if you would, and we'll get. I want to discuss sort of as you're saying, you define yourself as human. We'll get into the pro-human discussion in a little bit, but talk just a little bit about the background of the organization, a little bit about how and why it was set up, and then you have this amazing set of intellectuals, of thought leaders, Barry Weiss, Steven Pinker, Daryl Davis, my old classmate John McWhorter. Talk a little bit about how you assembled this amazing group of folks to really focus in on all the components of this very important set of themes.
Sure. Well, FAIR was launched by our founder, Brian Bartning, and it happened after he decided to pull his kids out of the private school they were going to in New York because they were implementing all these anti-racism protocols and policies and approaches that were antithetical to everything he personally and I personally, obviously, but that he grew up understanding, the kind of MLK sort of approach of, not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character.
Yep.
That very fundamental thing that was taught to many and most of us probably was being changed dramatically. And, he took issue with those things, rightfully so, in my view, and pulled his kids out of school. He wrote a piece for the Wall Street Journal, I believe, and kind of talking about this, and then afterwards launched FAIR as a way to to serve as a kind of a better approach, a way of not combating is the wrong word, but a way of addressing these issues in constructive ways and productive ways, rather than these kind of antagonistic, warlike kind of way that so many other places and people have engaged in. As for the advisors, I don't know how that was done. That was before my time, but we managed to pull together a number of really interesting intellectuals, public thinkers, figures, academics, people from all different places and across the ideological spectrum, right? Who agree with these fundamental principles that FAIR is trying to advance. Obviously, civil rights and liberties, but also freedom of expression. And I think that the key component is the emphasis on the unique individuality of every single person, which is simultaneously emphasized by our common humanity. So this, kind of using both ends of the kind of the zoom lens, right? Zooming in all the way and saying each of us is a unique individual. You cannot make assumptions about us based on our group identity or our immutable traits. But at the same time, we are all human beings, and there are things that we know about ourselves, just being human beings, that we can ground our discourse in, and we can connect with and connect on. So it's those two things that I think are really undergirding what FAIR is trying to do and how FAIR is trying to approach all these crazy issues.
And I think you just put your toe in sort of the theme of what being pro-human means, and advocating for one human race, individual civil rights and liberties, and so forth. And then you have this FAIR has a pledge, a pro-human pledge, and I'll just read a couple pieces of that: fairness, treating everyone equally without regard to skin color or characteristics. And then there's understanding, I am open-minded, and then all the humanity, recognizing that every person has a unique identity. Shared humanity is precious. Obviously, 2022, some of these things have gotten thrown up in the air a bit. Talk a little bit about sort of when you're out there representing there, talking about sort of the principle of pro-humanity.
Mm-hmm.
What's the environment out there? Because I mean, you have a very important role in the organization in terms of messaging, editorial. Talk a little bit about how sort of this pro-human theme is being received. What types of
Mm-hmm.
feedback, positive or not, you get from sort of the 2022
Yeah.
ether out that's out there.
Well, it's a coinage, and it takes some time to get people to understand what we mean by it and to disabuse people of what they think we mean by it. Whether their misunderstandings or mischaracterizations are intentional or not. So there's that. That's always a bit of a challenge, but I think it's important because I think, as I was kind of alluding to, so much of what's wrong with the way that we are approaching anti-racism, or DEI trainings or things like that in our discourse today is that we are essentializing, we are emphasizing to a pernicious degree group identity, group traits, group characteristics, and we are then by necessity erasing individual human beings, right? So I, sitting here right now, am not Angel Eduardo, a single individual human being. I am a, quote unquote brown person or Latinx person, quote unquote, and I am an avatar for this larger group, which is then treated as though it is homogenous in terms of its ideas, opinions, behaviors, right? So I just get completely erased. And that touches back to the, don't call me white thing,
Mm-hmm.
because yeah, I'm still Dominican, right? My parents still emigrated from the place that they did. And that's still my culture and my background. I still speak Spanish. I still eat the food. I still listen to that sort of music. All that stuff is part of my identity and who I am. But I also listen to Led Zeppelin, and I love reading, these kinds of books, and I like writing poetry. And none of those things are incompatible with me being who I am, right? But if you force me into kind of identity boxes, you must oversimplify. You must erase me and flatten me, right? And so that's the nature of the pro-human thing. It's re-emphasizing and continuing to reinforce this idea that no matter what we're doing, we have to recognize we are dealing with individuals. We are dealing with individual human beings with their own perspectives and ideas, and we cannot assume these things based on their immutable traits.
And continuing on that, now moving from
Mm-hmm.
sort of pro-humanism now to something that you brought up now a couple of times, anti-racism.
Mm-hmm.
When I look up sort of the prefix anti, you either get something that is opposed or something
Right.
that is the opposite of. And I come out of the pharmaceutical industry, so I think of things like antibiotics, which kill germs, and
Right.
antibodies, which kill viruses.
Yeah. Yeah.
And obviously opposed to, but then also there's I do a lot of sort of physics related stuff. Sort of think of things like antimatter. Antimatter is not nothing. Antimatter is a form of matter that is the very opposite of matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Another example, I enjoy the theme of anti-fragility. Something that's anti-fragile isn't something that's not going to break. It's something that gets stronger with the stress, like when you do exercise. And this is, this anti-racism thing, and I know John obviously writes a lot about this.
Mm-hmm.
Another term that's gotten, as you said, pernicious. It's gotten thrown out of whack a bit. Talk a
Yeah.
little bit about how your organization views this principle of anti-racism and what I think I like to be I like non-racism. I like no racism
Mm-hmm.
existing. Talk a little bit about sort of
Mm-hmm.
how FAIR looks at this theme and what the
Yeah.
proper alternatives are.
I think that you're pointing to the issue of sort of intention versus practice,
Yep.
right? The intention of anti-racism is good. Racism is bad. We don't like it. We want to be against it. We are against it. That's great. I'm against it. I'm totally, if outside of this culture war bubble, if you never heard the term before and someone said, well, are you an anti-racist? I would probably say, yeah, that sounds right.
Yep.
You know? Same thing with terms like feminist, right? Like, well, do you believe in the equality for women? Of course I do. So yeah, that makes me a feminist, I suppose, right? But now there are different usages, and people kind of get mixed up in the practice of it, right? So I think these things are well intentioned, and we agree with anti-racism, nominally, but there are certain ways of approaching that sort of thing, or ways of viewing it and ways of practicing it, that end up being just as racist, or more divisive than they should be, or more, oversimplifying the situation or the circumstances, right? Becoming that, the hammer that all you see is nails. It can become that way very easily. So FAIR's approach is, once again, to say, yes, there are definitely problems. There's definitely racism. There are definitely issues in the world and in our society and our government, et cetera, that need to be addressed. But there are right and wrong ways of addressing. There are constructive and destructive ways of addressing these things. Our emphasis, our hope, our ideal is to approach these things in a constructive way, rather than a destructive way. And I think that puts us at odds with a lot of the current forms of anti-racism, because there is such a destructive way of approaching these things. We want to tear these things down. We want to destroy them. Which, if you're thinking, well, this thing is racist, I want to get rid of it. Okay, that makes sense, but it's an oversimplification. There's more complexity there. There's more nuance there. And I think our thing is trying to be the most reasonable people in the room, trying to be the people who go, well, hold on a second, let's think about this. Let's make sure we're not being too hasty or too broad. So that's really where we're coming from. It's a difficult line to toe, but we're trying our best.
Yeah, you're doing it in a very, very refreshing and elegant way, I have to say. I mean, in thinking through and these issues, and once again bringing sort of the intellectual capability of your advisors together to really take a different lens on this stuff. Angel, I was wondering if we could talk a little bit about it. So, FAIR is divided up in sort of these different components where you look at the different topics like education, like healthcare, like the arts. And I thought it'd be interesting just to talk a few of the examples of sort of initiatives you're involved in. And one is, I can start with this one because I come out of the biomedical space, but there was a lawsuit against the New York City regarding discrimination activities during sort of COVID-19 vaccination. And once again here, here's a virus, it's killing everybody. Talk a little bit about sort of how you went into this, because I know there was a lot of okay, we're going to focus on certain communities initially, but take a little give us a little background of what this is all about specifically.
So it's been a little bit. This was early this year, early 2022, I believe. But and I don't think that this was actually formally implemented. We caught it beforehand, but there were kind of amendments to procedures saying, because there was a scarcity of certain COVID-19 treatments, they needed to figure out how to prioritize certain patients. And one of the criteria that they decided to add was race as a kind of comorbidity, right? And that's obviously, a silly thing to do for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that race is this nonsense construct that has no actual tie to biology, not really. But beyond that, it was being proposed to be used as a proxy for actual comorbidities, right? So, socioeconomic status, things like that, which do make sense, right? If you live in an underserved community, if you are of a low socioeconomic background, it makes more sense. You're probably going to be exposed to certain things. You're probably going to have certain types of jobs that increase your risk, right? You're probably going to have actual comorbidities like obesity. And then there's also, things like age and whatnot. But using race as a proxy for it opens you up to all these errors, medical errors that could be incredibly harmful and even fatal. So, you know, someone like me, I'm 37 years old. I'm pretty healthy. I don't have any medical issues to speak of, but I would be bumped to the front of the line over a woman who is, let's say, 75 and racialized as white and very infirm and maybe an asthmatic or something like that, right? So using race as this kind of proxy is automatically going to skew things and put things in this wonky way where, you know, people who may not need treatment or these specific treatments will get them, and people who do need them may not get them. So it just puts everything totally out of whack. And of course, you know, in my opinion, there are so many other you know, even just visually, there are ways of assessing whether somebody needs more help than somebody else, right? The color of their skin is a terrible one, but you can just see if somebody appears to be much older, if somebody appears to be very overweight, right? Those are quick things you can see in a patient within a couple of seconds, and that will actually be a more accurate way of assessing whether they should be prioritized or not. But their race that's a terrible one, right? Because there are people, I mean, my mother is fair skinned. She's about as fair skinned as you are. So would she be racialized as white? Would she be like, who knows, right? This whole thing makes no sense. It's just a silly criterion to use. It's well intentioned. They're trying their best to kind of do this anti-racism thing as far as they understand it, but it needed to be flagged because it was going to cause all these ridiculous issues and set terrible precedents.
Talk a little bit along those lines now of the Supreme Court. Fair wrote a brief in support of a petitioner, Students for Fair Admissions. It's the president and fellows of Harvard College. Again, okay, take us now. Here we're entering from fair in healthcare and fair into education. So talk a little bit about what this was about.
Yeah, so there's all this stuff going on at Harvard about the admissions criteria, and you know, they're fulfilling quotas based on race groups, and Asian people are overrepresented, and there's this whole thing of trying to get the numbers right. You know, it's crazy. And of course now Asian students feel they're being discriminated against unfairly, right? So that, you know, these kids do all this work, they pass all these tests, they meet every criteria, and now they're being rejected because why? So, you know, that's where they're coming from.
Right.
And the whole thing is nuts. And, you know, it touches on the affirmative action stuff. And, you know, it's a tricky thing because we understand and we want the desire to help people who have been historically disenfranchised, historically marginalized, historically, you know, made so that they cannot access these you know, these schools, resources, etc. Right? We want to help those people. We want to find ways to help those people. We want to find ways to even the playing field. But discriminating against other people for the sake of that, you're just kind of reshuffling the cards there. It's the same deck, right? And there's got to be a better way. And so that's really where we're coming from philosophically, is just that, you know, it's we can't do the Ibram Kendi thing of fixing discrimination with more discrimination, right? We can't do that. That's a losing game, and we need to figure out some other way. So that's, philosophically speaking, that's where we're coming from. When it gets to implementing it gets very complicated. It's legal stuff that I don't have the authority to talk about. But that's where we're coming from. You know, there are these individual human beings who are trying to get something, go somewhere, get ahead, and there's no reason they should be discriminated against as individuals because of these group things, these group identity issues, and historical, you know, governmental, societal issues.
So moving now from health to education and now into your personal domain. I'm talking to a writer, a musician, photographer, designer. Take us into fair in the arts. I mean, what topics are you um, at the fore for you in terms of all of these different disciplines. Where, what are you focusing on in FAIR specifically, and what are some of the areas you think are being overlooked that we need to spend a little more time on when it comes to sort of the basket that represents the arts and some of the FAIR
Yeah.
philosophy?
I think the arts, obviously I'm biased, but I do think the arts are incredibly important. It's one of the most important facets of our culture because our culture is reflected in our art, right? Whatever we're going through, whatever we're struggling with, whatever people are thinking, all that stuff gets manifested in the art of the day. And it's a fascinating way to look back on other cultures and other times in history. And I think right now there's a lot of struggle because of all this anti-racism and identitarian politics and activism and stuff. None of which necessarily is bad, right? There's always been political art, there's always been activist art, and that's fantastic. And I wouldn't want to change that. But there's this strange thing happening where if your art is not activist art, if your art is not political, or if it's the wrong activist art, or if it's the wrong political art, people want to get rid of it. They want to excise it. They want to prevent it from being funded. They want to prevent it from being put on. So they want to prevent people from seeing it. So there's a lot going on in the arts right now where artists feel that they either can't speak, can't create the things they want, or they're actively pushed out for having the wrong points of view. And so Fair in the Arts was created, we launched it just a few months ago. And we're still sort of building out what it's going to be and what, all the things we want to do. But it's, at its core, it's a professional network, and it's a kind of support system and a community for people who want to create art for the sake of it, for people who value the creation of art, and who feel that this overly restrictive climate is bad for art. And we want to find ways to fix that. So eventually that will be, live events, that will be, other kinds of art projects. It will also be grant funding for certain projects that aren't being funded elsewhere for political, ideological reasons. And, keeping in mind that art is precious. Art is the lifeblood of our culture in so many ways. And that's kind of why it's the battleground for so much of this stuff, right? It's why people are so hyper focused on it, because I think everyone can kind of intuitively feel that it's important, and that where the art goes is where we go, in a way, right? There is the kind of chicken and egg thing of art imitating life, imitating art, imitating life, right? But we can tell that it's an important component of the culture, and everyone is trying to seize it. And I think everyone belongs there, and all the voices belong there, and we should use it as a way to process ourselves and process our situation and our society. So it's important to preserve. It's important to take care of.
Outstanding. So, Angel, you're located in New York City. I'm down the road here in Philly, and I'm familiar with the Philadelphia chapter of FAIR. Talk a little bit about the chapters, how things are growing and throughout the country, and a little bit of sort of just how listeners can get involved no matter where they are. Sort of what's happening sort of on the local front with some of the chapters and some of the local initiatives.
Right. Well, it really depends. Every chapter is sort of localized, and it's focused on whatever's going on in that particular community. So you have people, a great deal of our membership is parents who are concerned with what's going on in school, because of course school is another sort of focal point for our culture, right? How we educate our kids, what we educate our kids with is incredibly important for our society and our culture. So they're concerned about that. A lot of places are also concerned about the arts. They're also concerned about our institutions of higher learning and our institutions, just private businesses and organizations, and the ways that anti-racism is kind of infused into those. And the goal is to try to further this sort of pro-human approach, this constructive approach, rather than the divisive approach. So it really varies. It really depends on which chapter and what they are focused on in particular. But I would say, you know, if people want to get more involved, they want to find out about a chapter near them, fairforall.org/join us, or fairforall.org. Just go there, click join us. You can sign up for newsletters. You can be assigned to a chapter. You can connect with local chapter members near you. There's a Philly chapter. There's a few New York chapters. You know, I think we've got, I actually don't want to say, I'm not sure how many chapters we have. We have a good amount, but we're reshuffling. We're reshuffling. There's kind of 50 state chapters now in the US. And then there are smaller localized chapters that have been kind of moved around. But there is a chapter near you, at the very least, on a state level. And there are plenty of ways to get involved. You can, you know, take the FAIR pledge, which you outlined a little bit earlier. It's just a little kind of sign up form, but it's a way of publicly stating your intentions to live by these principles and to model them. And hopefully we can start a kind of groundswell of this more compassionate, more constructive approach to all of these issues that are really difficult to deal with. And, you know, human beings are difficult, right? we're all kind of messy and difficult, but there's a way to do it that is helpful rather than harmful, and unifying rather than divisive. And I think, you know, I really believe in it. That's why I'm here. I believe in this approach. I believe in this way of doing things. And so if that sounds like you, come on over. We'd love to have you.
Excellent. Really excellent. Angel, before I let you go, what's happening with you? I mean, obviously you're very active with FAIR, but your writing, your music, your photography, where can we see you, listen to you, meet you possibly? Anything hot coming up for 2022 that you want to mention? Please take the floor. I'd love to hear more about it.
Let's see. I keep writing as much as I can outside of FAIR stuff. I have a band that we're just sort of getting our feet off the ground. So no announcements on that yet. But anything that I do, anything that I'm working on, you can see at my website, angeleduardo.com. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at StrangelEdWeird. Okay. And I'm hopefully going to be very busy for the next few years.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, we will put the link to all that in the bio, and we'll continue not obviously not just with FAIR, but everything else you do, and continue to root you on, because you have a fascinating portfolio there, and really impressive
thank you.
amount of stuff that you're involved in. So just really impressive. And again, for everybody that is going to be listening to this episode across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Angel Eduardo, writer, musician, photographer, designer, director of messaging and editorial for the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, doing really amazing work there. Angel, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us for a little while about all these important issues. Obviously, thank you for everything you're doing there at FAIR for this pro-human approach to things. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow through what you're doing. It's a really fascinating story, and I look forward to continue to follow it.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been awesome, man. Nice to meet you.